I know that I depend heavily on Debbie Thomas. I have to admit I love reading her essays each week. And this week, she brought up a study that was done a few years ago by Sarah Brosnan and Franz de Waal, two zoologists at Emory University. And they were studying the issue of fairness. And the question is that something unique, something we learn about fairness? Or is it something that's somehow hardwired into us that we know is there? We've already talked about Jonah a little bit this morning, and the question, is it right for you to be angry? God's question to Jonah. Is it right for you? And Jonah, of course, is caught up with it's not fair. You let these people live. I'm sitting here waiting for the sideshow, and you just have all this mercy on these people. Why? They're bad people. How dare you? And of course, God reminds Jonah that these are human beings made in God's image who are lost and broken. What they deserve is neither here nor there. What they need is compassion. Many times have you heard somebody say, well, they deserve everything they got. They're evil people, or they're bad people, or unfortunately, in the case of so many of color who have died, well, if they hadn't been resisting arrest, they wouldn't have been killed. No. And so often, there is that part that we don't hear. We think of fairness in terms of us. And I'll go back to the study that Debbie Thomas referred to in just a moment. But before I do that, I want us to hear the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. It's not fair. Hear the word of the Lord. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About the third hour he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace, doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the same thing. About the 11th hour, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long, but doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones." Beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about the 11th hour came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "Friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first last." The literal question, the actual way that is translated could be translated or should be translated from the Greek. That last question is your eye evil because I am good? God bless the reading of God's word. Debbie Thomas, as I said, started off her essay this week talking about a study that two zoologists at Emory University made. And what they did was they took capuchin monkeys and they had them in adjacent cages where the monkeys could see each other. And they were trained to take turns giving small granite rocks to their human handler. Well, they would give a rock and then they would receive a piece of cucumber as a reward. Well, capuchin monkeys love cucumbers. I never knew this. I found this out from reading this essay. Capuchin monkeys love cucumbers. And so they very eagerly would hand the rock over and get the cucumber. But then the zoologists, the trainers, changed the idea a little bit, and they gave the first monkey who handed the rock a piece of cucumber. But the second monkey got a grape. Now, grapes, according to this study, were the equivalent of fine wine or caviar. I mean, this is just something amazing to the capuchin monkeys. So when the first monkey saw that the second monkey got a grape, the first monkey handed his next rock over very willingly, only to get a cucumber again. And on top of that, the second monkey got a grape for not even handing over a rock. Now, can you imagine just for a moment how that felt? And so the first monkey he threw his cucumber, and then he began to just throw his rocks and just pitch a fit, because it wasn't fair. The other monkey got grapes, and he didn't have to do anything to get that grape. Now, they tried that with other primates, and it was the same, and pointed out that even among children begin very young knowing that this is not fair. This child got something and I didn't get it. Why did I get the same thing that child has? It's not fair. So we look at the questions of today. God's question to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry? Is it right for you to be angry when I've saved these people because they didn't know what was right or wrong? These are people who need compassion. These are people who need love. And then the other question from the gospel, when the last people arrived and they received the same pay as the people who were first, and then the first people got the same pay as the last people who were hired, and they became angry, and the landowner said to them, is your eye evil because I am good? Is there a problem with my being generous to someone else? Now, I've always heard people wonder about why in the world were these last people not hired all along. Perhaps these last people weren't hired because they were the infirm. Perhaps they were old. And nobody wanted them because, well, they couldn't do the work. They were just as desperate to put food on the table as the young bucks that were hired at 6 o'clock in the morning. They were just as desirous of making the money, but for whatever reason, nobody would hire them. And so the landowner had gone back several times, the vineyard owner had gone back several times, and had hired people. Now, I'll admit, if I had gone to work and had worked all day long, and then somebody came in and worked 1 hour and we received the same pay, I guess I'd have been screaming, that's not fair. I think that's where all of us are. We want to be paid. If we work for 12 hours, we want to be paid for 12 hours. It's not fair that guy only worked 1 hour and he got paid the same thing. But think about the fact that that one person, or those people who were hired and only worked 1 hour, were still able to go home and put food on the table for their families. And there was an agreement made. Will you come work for me for a denarius, a day's pay? And they agreed to that. The people who were hired at the first watch, say 6 o'clock in the morning, the ones who were hired next, the ones who were hired, and even the ones who were hired 1 hour before the day ended. They all agreed to the same pay. And so the vineyard owner was very generous and caring. But it is not how we view the world. We view it that if we work for 8 hours, we should get more than a person who works for 1. And it's not fair if you're going to stand around and do nothing all day long and then you get the same thing we get. Somebody's going to say, I'm sure at some point, well, you know what, that sounds a little bit like socialism. No, it's not socialism, by the way. But there is the belief and the reality that people are willing often to work, but they aren't given the chance. Perhaps they're a person who has a record and they're not trusted to work because they've been in trouble with the law. Or perhaps they're old, but their savings was tied up in somebody's scheme, and they lost it all because somebody was not generous but was a thief. Or maybe they thought they had saved enough for retirement, only to discover that the retirement account didn't go as far as they thought it would go. And Lord knows Social Security doesn't pay anything now. And there are people who would like to take that away from the people who have worked for it. So it is that we find ourselves wondering, well, why don't they just go get a job? And it is true that sometimes the people that want to go get jobs, nobody wants to hire them. They don't want to hire gays and lesbians. They don't.
Good afternoon. We are delighted you were able to join us today for Excerpts from Sunday Worship. While we have resumed traditional Sunday morning worship, we understand that many of you are not ready or able to return to regular activities. We hope that you will find these weekly videos posted on both YouTube and Facebook a way to stay in fellowship with us. Throughout September and October, Reverend Tim will be offering a joint book study with Piedmont College via Zoom on Tuesday evenings. Copies of the book are available at the church. Please connect with Reverend Tim or Reverend Joyce for links to the conversation. Lastly, please remember that the work of the church continues even when you cannot be with us. We need your prayers, participation, and financial support. Checks may be mailed to P.O. Box 1871, Demarest, Georgia 30535. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to the day when we may all be together to worship and fellowship.